Evening, everybody, and welcome to our live city update for July 15th, 2025. I'm Mayor Paul Horn, and we'll begin with our land acknowledgement this evening. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that this evening we are gathered on the unceded, ancestral, and shared territories of the Stolo Nation, of the Stolo people, particularly of the Katzie, Kwantlen, Lekamel, Skalitz, Mathqui, and Samath traditional territories. I'm joined this evening by Shay from our regular support crew at Valley Tech. Thank you so much, Shay. And by our manager of communications, Taryn Hubbard, who's going to kind of help with ringleading the questions that you've submitted. And on the screen, you'll see a slide. I just really wanted to point out that we are really proud of the work that's been done to upgrade the exterior of our Mission Museum, really restored it to look like it was supposed to be. So we have all era appropriate enhancements there, both to the roof and to the exterior cladding. So we're really, really pleased with the way that came out. This evening, just to give you an idea of how we're going to proceed, we're going to do things a little differently than what we've done in the past because so many questions have been asked. And really, the questions give us mostly the opportunity for an update anyway. So rather than start off with an update, we're going to instead run through the 16 questions that we received from you in advance. And that will include questions about our planning for the coming year and 3 months before the next election. And we also will receive some more questions in real time. We got about 4 more today. They aren't in the presentation, but if we have time, I will answer all of them. And I'm going to turn to you, Taryn, right now to tell people how they can submit more questions. We've set aside some time, 10 to 15 minutes for those. How can people submit questions in real time to you right now?
Okay, if people want to submit some questions, they can go to mission.ca, and right on the homepage, you'll see our banner is dedicated to this event. And if they click on that link, it will bring them to a form, and they just have to put their question in and submit it, and then I will receive that.
Thank you so much. So we're going to be here till about 7:30 this evening. If you're watching live, you can watch the whole thing, and we'll go through all the questions we received. And for those of you who watch it later on a recording on YouTube, it should be set up so that you'll be able to scroll into the description beneath the video and actually click on the chapter or the segment that addresses your specific question. So if you want to go back and look at specific information, or you are only interested in one thing and you're watching this later, feel free to just find that in the description. We're going to wrap up by telling you more of how you can stay in contact with the city and with myself. But with that, let's get started. So we're going to jump in with all of your recent questions. There's a photograph of an event that happened last year at Silverdale Hall involving the Silverdale Elementary School kids. So great memory there, but we'll jump right in. Taryn, go ahead.
Okay, so the first questions relate to growth and infrastructure. Why is Mission growing so fast, and what is the city doing to manage it?
Thank you. Great question. In fact, I'll say all the questions we received were great questions. Growth is really not a Mission problem. It's a BC, Canada, and pretty much entirely the Western world type of a problem right now. But I think we see it more here in Mission because we are considered to be quite affordable compared to the Metro Vancouver communities to our west. And so because we are the next community outside of Metro Vancouver, a lot of people come here because housing is affordable by comparison. I wouldn't say it's affordable by most other standards, but certainly that's the case. It's important to acknowledge as well that both the province and the federal government have done a number of things to both mandate and catalyze accelerated housing development as a result of the housing crisis all across the country. And so we have an expectation placed upon us, as do all municipalities, by the province to grow by a certain amount, both in terms of all types of housing as well as affordable housing specifically. We have control over some aspects. That's eroded a little bit as a result of what we've seen with the provincial legislation, but we still have some control over the where and the how development occurs. But what we don't have we don't have an influence over is how many people want to come here and how much pressure that puts on us. We have recently adopted our new OCP, and that new OCP really does focus on things like neighborhood centers that will have amenities like parks, shops, schools, and transit. And we have approved a number of mixed-use facilities up in places like Cedar Valley that incorporate more of the private sector amenities people want, like, for example, stores and restaurants and banks and medical offices and so forth. And we contribute in some cases directly to those amenities, such as the Kaleidoscope Daycare, inclusive daycare that's opening up on Tunbridge very soon. And of course, the proposed fire hall and safety building in Cedar Valley, those are Civic built. But we have to, a lot of the time, advocate for increased resources around transit, hospitals, and schools, and we often have to do that in collaboration with other bodies like the Board of Education and Fraser Health. And I'm going to talk more about that in another question coming up here. So we're doing what we can, and I'll talk more about roads because I know that question's coming up as well. But right now, a lot of the work we have to do is in advocacy, and I think we are making some headway there.
Okay, now jumping into question number 2. Why are we building homes without roads, schools, hospitals, or businesses to support them?
Well, I've said these are good questions, but I would say that this is a question we've actually asked of the province ourselves. So Mission has sort of taken on the lead in advocating for the idea that we should be growing our communities in a complete way. We brought a resolution first to the Fraser Valley Regional District, then to the Lower Mainland Local Government Association, and it's going to go to UBCM. And I joined the board of the Lower Mainland Local Government Association just because this is such a core point for all of us here, and Mission, I think, is feeling it more than others. This is exactly the point that we're making to the province, is that if they want us to build want us to build homes or have homes built here, they need to make sure that they are meeting us with the schools and the hospitals and the highways and the transit infrastructure that go along with growth. The city works really closely with the bodies that are actually responsible for this stuff, and I think a lot of people don't understand. Cities don't build schools. They aren't responsible for funding them. They aren't responsible for operating them. That's entirely the domain of the Board of Education. And so we look to them as partners. We take their lead and we work with them as collaborators. And that's part of the reason that we take the, I think, unique approach of having members of our Board of Education join us when we meet with the Minister of Education every year at UBCM to advocate on this point. And I think we saw some growth as a result of that collaboration, and I think we had a receptive MLA here that led to the high school project. But we immediately went back to the ministry and said, we don't just need a high school. That's actually an issue that has much to do with age and the capacity of that building as it does with growth. But really where we're seeing pressure is on elementary schools, and so we'll continue to advocate for that. We also have done the same sort of thing around hospitals and healthcare. We haven't really seen a lot of growth in our healthcare campus here over the last, I would say 10 years before I had the opportunity to get this job. And I think it's largely because there was quite an adversarial role between Mission and Fraser Health and the province. We had seen a lot of investment before 2011, and that council was successful in working with Fraser Health to bring in the Trim building, to bring in the community health center, and to improve services at our hospital, but that sort of lay stagnant for about 10 years. Since 2021, we've seen a rather remarkable amount of investment, and I think it often gets overlooked. So, for example, we know that the community fundraised, working with Mission Altogether for Healthcare and the Fraser Valley Healthcare Foundation, in partnership with Fraser Health and with city funding to bring the CAT scan to the Mission Memorial Hospital. Our advocacy has finally paid off with $18 million worth of investment in our emergency room. And that's huge. To give you an idea, we're going from 17 beds to 41 beds in that emergency room, and the specialized spaces there. Our advocacy brought 50 beds of housing, including 12 complex care beds, to that same neighborhood, and a 10,000 square foot urgent care center. And I don't think we're done yet. We're still advocating for things that will bring doctors here, such as opportunities to house healthcare workers affordably. We are still working on the Mission Healthcare Hub, or Health and Wellness District, which we believe will help us with that neighborhood plan to attract both private and public sector healthcare providers all across the spectrum for our community. So that's the sort of work we're continuing to do. Through the Fraser Valley Regional Hospital District, we're doing this advocacy as well. And it's important to understand that that body helps to fund up to 40% of capital projects. So we've insisted to Fraser Health that they involve us much more as a series of communities, as a region, in their capital planning. They don't have a 5-year plan, but we've asked them to do that, and we're getting somewhere with that work finally. We've asked them to align their process with ours and to get input from members of the community, families, patients, healthcare providers, and in particular to listen to the communities, both municipalities and electoral areas and First Nations on the North Shore, because I know we often feel as though we're not being thought about instead of being heard mostly, them hearing mostly the larger centers to the south of the Fraser. When it comes to roads, a lot of people don't realize that whenever a development occurs in our community, we collect development cost charges to pay for that new growth from the developer. And we are doing that actively. So we just updated our DCCs, and in fact, we've done it twice in the last 2 years because of the new provincial legislation. And we have a transportation master plan that we update roughly every 5 years as well. And so it's important for people to know that that development is paying for those roads, and it will continue to do that as we move into the future. There's more. Let's see here. What else do I have? Oh, and that particularly, we know that there's lots of development that will happen in the North Cedar Valley area, and in the exact same way you saw improvements on Cedar Street south of Egglestone and Tunbridge, you're going to see that here as well as we move north. And the same thing on the side roads like Emery and Laminman and Rosetta. Those roads will improve with development, and they will be funded largely through those development cost charges. We also have done our successful advocacy around the highways, and I think it's really important. I have to say thank you so much to MLA Alexis, or former MLA Alexis, who made a really pointed effort of bringing MLAs to our community. We brought Rob Fleming into this community and had him tour around and see what it was like to drive over the Murray-Glasgow overpass. And it was a compelling thing. Now, we've done that again, most recently with the new Minister of Transportation, Mike Farnworth. That has resulted in things like us getting the South Mission Integrated Transit Plan. And that plan is still being, we gave our feedback very recently to the province, and we asked them with that plan to help us to understand how we can make sure it's funded. That work has been waiting, believe it or not, since 1973 to get funded. And obviously, that's incredibly slow. That's slow beyond anybody's standards. The Murray-Glasgow overpass was meant to be a temporary solution. And so we have been advocates to not just have trucks move over the Murray-Glasgow overpass. We're really grateful that that intersection has been improved, but we also see what you see, that traffic is backing up there every afternoon and at Stave Lake Street. So a bypass should head straight down out of Stave Lake Street, and that's what's planned. We also are grateful for the improvements at Highway 7, Highway 11, and the Cedar Connector. But what we really need there is what's called a flyover, a way for people to not have to stop there and bottleneck and be able to continue down the highway. So all of that is being planned, and we'll continue to be advocates with the ministry for that. And as I said, we've literally brought the ministry out for that. I've already talked a little bit about the work we're doing to attract local businesses in places like Cedar Valley. We've done that by asking developers to create mixed-use spaces with commercial space on the ground floor. We've created density bonuses, allowing developers to get more residential units out if they create space for things like medical clinics and daycares, and those are being built. I've mentioned that we helped to bring the Kaleidoscope Inclusive Daycare Project forward, thanks to the leadership of Mission Association for Community Living. And we know that the population, as it fills out there, will be a bit of a magnet for enterprise. We know that we can't tell banks or grocery stores when to show up, but we also know that they look at the population density in neighborhoods, and when you build compact, walkable neighborhoods, those are more likely to attract those businesses. So a lot is going on. I hope I captured all that.
That's great. Now, shifting gears a little bit, what's being done to improve winter road maintenance?
Well, thank you. This is a much shorter answer, thankfully. So the city has actually just recently approved the purchase for 3 additional vehicles to help move snow during winter events. And I think people need to be realistic about whether they're still going to see residential streets be cleaned immediately as soon as snow starts falling. And I think we put out a video, maybe we can link this for folks, one of the block talks as well, so that people can understand how our plowing works. So our city staff get out and they work 24 hours a day as long as it's safe to do so when snow starts to fall. They even brine when there's a weather forecast for snow. But they continue to plow the high priority routes, which are the routes associated with disaster response, emergency vehicles, access to the hospital, and transit, until the snow stops. And then when the snow stops, they start on the secondary and tertiary routes getting into your neighborhoods. So if snow is continuously falling, to be honest, it's not going to matter whether we have 3 or 4 new vehicles. The chances are we're going to be using them to clear the major arterials first and foremost. I think we are considering more and more work around pedestrian areas that are not accessible, because we know there are more seniors who have difficulty plowing their own sidewalks. But it's important for people to know that it gets more and more expensive on average every year, and very difficult to forecast how much we should spend on snow plowing, because that means we would have to accurately forecast the snow that falls in January and February and March, as well as the snow that falls in November and December, because we base it on 1 calendar year. And so we might have a good end of a year, but start the next year with a lot of snow. If we invest in a lot of this equipment and have it sit on the sidelines for 350 to 360 days of the year, that's extremely costly. We use our equipment usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 15 days a year, and we're trying to balance what the community wants around response times, as well as with the tax impact.
All right. So the second area of questions relate to the City Hall proposal. So with this one, how will the city move forward?
I think I might have this question.
This question was about how the city will move forward to ensure the community gets clear, accurate, and information.
Oh, okay, so I see. Okay,
and that public conversation isn't dominated by...
Okay, so it's how will we move forward with communication in the
Yes.
future? Okay, that is the one that I have here. Perfect. I'd say there are 4 things for sure, and one more that we as a council need to talk about. One of the things that we needed to do, I think, is let the community know more what we were experiencing here at City Hall, and really let people have a glimpse into the challenges that we're experiencing up here. We have a building that is not up to the current security standard. It's not up to the current standard when it comes to heating and cooling. It's not accessible. I don't think most people realize that the part of the building that I'm sitting in is 2 stories, and then another part of the building is 2 stories above that. It's not conducive to building an elevator because it's a split level building. And the other, the extensions of the building, there's a 2-level extension and then there's a 1-level extension. And so there's no real way, especially if you're not willing to sacrifice space in an already compressed building, to make it accessible. So we really haven't done as good a job as we should in letting people know what we're going through here. I joke about this, but I think we need to have, and Shay, I'll get you to zoom in on this. We really do need, I think, to have a City Hall bingo card. And you can see that literally when it comes to things that we see up here on my bingo card, we have literally identified, just in my office alone, giant flies, wasps, spiders, ants, ladybug infestation, stink bugs, And we have literally yesterday had a garter snake in the building. There have been dead rats found in the building. The area has black bears all around. And of course, it's not secure when we have threatening visitors. I jokingly say we've even spotted R2D2 because the HVAC system is so bad that if I want to work here in the summer, they have to put a rather antiquated mobile RV unit on a coffee table and have it take over my office and vent it in and out of the T-bar ceiling. Now, we haven't yet seen any radioactive waste, blessedly, but we also are not very likely to complete this bingo card because I don't think we'll ever see this building achieve a seismic protection standard, and I don't think it'll ever be possible to make it accessible to people who have disabilities or staff who become injured. We do have mice. We don't have enough adequate sunlight, and we often have people who have absolutely no idea why when they come up here, that the services they want are not in this building. So we're still lucky, no roof leaks that I'm aware of, no carbon monoxide leaks that I'm aware of, but I'm making a bit of a light of the situation. But the truth is, we haven't done a good job of letting people know how many of those things are real issues up here, and that's no laughing matter. I think we also needed to let people know, in terms of the process we were going through, the options that we were exploring and why we ruled them out. I think that people often don't understand why things are enclosed. I'll speak a little bit about that later on. But I think what council can do a better job of is saying, okay, we've explored that option. We have already come up with a rationale, and we can share that with the community. Let's tell them our concerns about something and see whether they have ideas, see if they have input on that. We still will never be able to update people on negotiations. And I think it's important for people to realize that would literally cost us more as taxpayers if we did that. I'll use the example of if you were trying to buy a used car, you would not go to the person who you were buying the used car from and tell them the absolute highest price you're willing to pay. You and your family members would agree on a bargaining strategy and try to negotiate a price at a lower offer. And then if you had to, you would go to something higher. Here, if we tried negotiating in an open way, we would just automatically lose the opportunity to get you the best deal, and we'd invite others to come in and drive the price up. And examples of both of those things happened recently and cost us both time and money in the process of bringing you this proposal. But I think we can do a better job of explaining all of our processes too. Plain and simple, it's not easy, and you can ask any new councillor, it takes 2-3 years to understand how many different readings you have to go through for financial bylaws versus land use bylaws versus policy changes. It's complex for us, so I certainly understand why it's complex for the community, and I think we can do a better job of including people in understanding what we're going to go through and making sure that they are assured and made comfortable that the city is neither able to or motivated to do something in a rushed or closed fashion. Even when you do something in a closed format, everybody on council, everybody on staff is eager to get it out into the community as soon as possible, and that's exactly the scenario in this type of a situation. So we had actually invested in creating some robust communication for the community, and our intention was to bring that out as we began the process last Monday. It was never our intention, it wouldn't even have been possible to do something that would have not followed a deliberative process and been in the public eye. And as you saw around the fire hall matter, council was quite okay with the idea where it was possible to go through a public input process, and we built that in there. I think we can continue to use diverse outreach tools like online platforms for people to watch something like this, watch videos. We had talked about doing video tours of the existing sites and letting people see for themselves what the new site, proposed site was going to look like. We have lots of experience with putting out digital surveys to people. We have lots of opportunities where we could have used graphics and had people come in and actually offer their opinion. as well as simple FAQs, primers, and other things. We already do a lot of this stuff. For example, we'll talk a little bit later on about the surveying we do annually, where we're getting an arm's length valid sample from our community. Rather than having one particular lobbying group skew the data, we wanted to make sure that we were getting data that met a high standard, was quality, and told the truth about what our community wanted. All of that could have been applied here, and we can apply it when we're coming up with the next big capital discussion. Now here's the fifth one, and it's one that council hasn't had a chance to meet about or talk about since the last time we addressed this issue. But I will say we do have to address our internal ethical issues and work hard to promote respectful civic dialogue. I've already spoken about the idea that what happened through that process went beyond a level of inconvenience or political sort of political moves or political process. A lot of times you see these kind of things and they are not what people like. They're not palatable to us. But that's different than when people cross a line that clearly gets into unethical territory or potentially even breaking of the law. And so I think council has reached a point where we're very concerned about this. I have heard from so many people over the last week who are equally concerned about this, and they're also reaching out because they're really concerned about the amount of misinformation and attacking that's going on a personal level. So I will ask that we as a city get out there and correct misinformation more proactively. It's really difficult to play a reactive game. People can say just about anything they want. I will guess that after this is done, people will construe some of the remarks I'm making here in a different way, and some folks will take them and believe them, especially for folks who are really sort of living online. So we have to all, I think, speak up and ask for accurate information and ask questions before we jump to conclusions. I often say this: please start with a question. Many years ago, before I ever ran for council, I remember coming to these chambers, and I was part of a group that was really concerned about Silverdale. And I noticed a lot of people would get up and be really angry. Well, I got up and I asked questions, and I would say that, 1 out of every 5 questions I had didn't satisfy me. But 4 out of the 5 times I asked a question, the answer made sense. And so when that happened, I focused on the one thing that I was concerned about. After one of the meetings, the director of planning came up to me and he said, "Thank you so much for 2 things. Thanks for coming prepared, and thanks for asking questions." And he was just super respectful back to me, and he's continued to be in contact with me over the years because that created a respectful relationship and one that allows for collaboration. I would ask that all of our members of the community insist on that from our neighbors. Our goal together is to rebuild trust through clear and more accessible communication. I think all of us on council understand that, and we'll continue to do that.
How do you plan to communicate long-term capital plans like City Hall that align with immediate community concerns like affordability, services, and infrastructure?
Last year, we had a capital planning open house or capital projects open house. I thought it was extraordinarily well done. I have to tell you that I was impressed by how much was happening, how well the information was communicated, and how many people came out. And I think from that, we've learned that we can do more of those, and we can capture some of the information that was in that live session for people who don't have an easy way of getting to those sessions, so they can see it online. And I'll be working with Taryn to actually make sure we get some of this in the newsletter, and we'll talk about how you can sign up for the newsletter later on. And I think we can do something I talked about earlier, which is describe the formative process we're going through around something like a city hall location or things like small theater spaces or arts spaces that are so in demand in our community, and help to share with the community the challenges that we're facing and the work we're going through, even if it has not yet borne fruit. I think we can, our budget input is going to be coming up this year. It's very clear to me that people are incredibly concerned about affordability. We have worked hard to enhance that. It's actually, believe it or not, considered an award-winning input and reporting process. Our staff at the finance department year after year win awards for this, but that doesn't mean we can't improve it. And so we are going to be looking at ways, I think, to get the word out even more, and especially early on in the process, because then we can have dialogue back and forth, and we can take that information constructively. For way too long, things have been weighted to the day of the presentation, and people come in and they see that we're on the cusp of making a decision, and they're upset because they haven't heard about it before. I get it. I've been through that. And so for me, the secret of this whole thing is to get people an opportunity to be involved in an informed way in the conversation earlier, so they don't have to be stressed. They don't have to sleep with one eye open wondering if they've missed something. And they can actually make constructive comments. There was a lady came up to myself and Councillor Gill last year in one of those sessions, and she was really stressed and upset. She came with her daughter, and she was really worried about her ability to pay rent as a young mom. And that was impactful. I know both Councillor Gill and I talked about that a lot throughout the process. So those are meaningful conversations, and I'll be looking for ways for us to enhance them this time. I think, again, we could acknowledge we could have done more to keep people informed about the civic facilities that we need and why we need them and when we need them, and connect that to service levels and connect that to safety standards, because I think people don't think of City Hall as something that really makes a difference in their lives the way that a rec center does or a fire hall does. But if you need a building permit, or if you want to become a delegation before council, or if you want to raise a question about an environmental concern in your neighborhood, for example, or you need a bylaw officer, for example, all of those things are going to be located at City Hall, and the speed with which communities can get responses is somewhat connected to how much that building works as a unit. Right now, we have everybody in 2 major locations, and I think we're at a very good likelihood in the short term, because of the fact we won't be moving ahead with the proposal of dispersing people into other settings, and that's part of something council needs to talk about. But it becomes a bit more cumbersome and confusing for members of the public when that happens. We recognize that people typically only get involved when there's something that concerns them, a land use application in their neighborhood, something about their taxes. We really have to do a cultivating of a culture in our community where people don't need to feel intimidated to come and speak to council. And so we've done things like council cafes and this type of process. I'm just Paul. I'm just a regular guy, and I think we've got Jag and Angel and Carol and Danny and Ken and Mark who are just the same. We really would just love to sit down with our neighbors. That's why you get in this for. And so the more we can make it easy to just chat with people, the better off we are. And I literally will give my email address at the end of this evening. I regularly go and have coffee with everyday folks. I like to tell people, on the very first day I was elected, I met with somebody representing one of the most financially successful organizations in our community and a person who was homeless on the same day. And that's just the way I like to do it. And I think everybody else in our council makes themselves equally available. So you'll have all kinds of opportunities. If you write us an email, you're going to get a response. It's a little difficult with me on telephones. I'll tell you right now, telephones are not great for me because they are the last in the line for me. Just getting back to messages and calls can sometimes be difficult to fit into my schedule. But email works really well, and so do in-person conversations. We really are committed to making sure we're ready with accurate, accessible information whenever public attention increases. I think folks were convinced in this most recent incidents that there was something going on that was untoward. It's disturbing to me that that happens. It's disturbing to me that people think that, first of all, their elected council wants to do something untoward. It's even more disturbing to think that others would stand by. Even if one member of our council really did want to do something that was for their ego or for some personal gain, the other 6 wouldn't stand by, and neither would our senior staff, people like our CAO, our deputy CAO, or finance director, or our corporate officer. Ms. Hubbard, our communications manager, would simply not put out a message that wasn't truthful, as she would not allow us to do something like that. And of course, there's provincial oversight in these processes as well. So it's disturbing to me that people believed that council would do something untoward, illegal, or unethical. It doesn't make sense to me. But we will continue to make sure that we demonstrate accuracy and accessibility information. And we ask you really to just, like I said, ask questions and stand up when people say this is a rumor that they've heard and they express it as a fact. Tell people where they can get the information. And I think that I've heard from a lot of people over the last week, and I understand why people are afraid to say that's not true or to speak specifically against some of these things. because they're afraid that they're going to be the next target. I've heard from a lot of people who don't understand why their names have been included in some of the videos or online posts that are out there. I don't either understand that. These are just people doing their best to help the community. But all you need to do is say quietly to people, here's where the information is, or here's how the process goes, or here's the mayor's email. Write him a question. So it's important for us to do that, and we will be sending out another survey soon to collect accurately the data, and I'll ask Taryn to update on that at the very end. And again, we do that through an arm's length process so that we get a real genuine picture of the community. Taryn.
Okay, so Mayor Horn is talking about our annual citizen satisfaction survey. And this is a survey that the City of Mission has conducted annually ahead of the budget period since 2016. And last year, the city worked with a third-party research company to conduct a survey of randomly selected residents throughout Mission. And we got a really thorough report, and it was weighted to Mission's population distribution by age, according to the most recent census data. And you can find this report on mission.ca. We have a public engagement page where we post our engagement summaries, and you can also find it at mission.ca/webcast.
Is that the page where those reports, is that engaged.mission.ca?
And engage.mission.ca is also a great hub for our engagement as well.
So we'll talk more about that later on, but I think that feeds into the next question that we're getting, actually. It's perfect timing.
Yes. Do you feel like you have a pulse on how the community feels?
I do. I think it's going to surprise some people to hear that, but I'll tell you why. The question actually went on to say, how do you know that that's the case, or how do you validate that? And that's why I said the information that we collect through that survey is really a much more reliable source than trying to understand through the noise and misinformation what actually people are saying. I think anybody who spends a lot of time on social media already understands that it's a place where folks can often express opinions very vocally and very strongly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they represent the entire cross-section of the community. And we hear from a lot of people who say, I go on there just to sort of, for the same reason I go to watch a demolition derby. I like to see some of the accidents, some of the conflicts that are on there, and they don't really participate. And so we are a bit worried, and I hear from these people who say, I would never participate there because I know I'm going to get jumped on. And so it's really important for us to do this process. I also have lots of, what I'll call quieter conversations with people through these council cafes, through looking at the questions we received here today. You can see that most of them are extraordinarily respectful questions. And things like our community interactions that we have at events. People come up and they know that they can approach members of council and communicate. I get emails and text messages all the time. And if a person feels comfortable with another member of council, that's A-okay. I would say that the vast majority of council lets me know within minutes if they have heard a concern from somebody, whether it's in a conversation or whether it's in an email. So it doesn't bother me if a person would rather speak with a Councillor Gill or a Councillor Plekas. That's why we have a team. And you speak to the person that you feel is most likely to carry the ball for you. Some of the validation sources, in addition to that, are the public meetings we have, for example, with the RCMP or around our capital projects I mentioned earlier. We are active on social media. I have to say, I think getting a pulse on the community is not a static thing. And part of the reason is that social media has a life of its own, and each platform has a life of its own. And so I don't go on all social media. I tend to be on X. You can follow me there. My handle is @bootstrap20. Others are on Facebook. Others are on Instagram. Our city is on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. So there are lots of ways, but my gosh, they are extraordinarily consumptive of time, and it's difficult to track all of them. So there's nothing better than a person-to-person conversation. We also get input from our partner agencies. I meet on a regular monthly basis with the Executive Director of Fraser Health, with Sarah for Women, with Mission Community Services, with a coalition of food organizations, a coalition of helping agencies. I meet with our staff who are out doing all the same things. I meet with counselors on a regular basis to update them and hear what their conversations are. And I have all kinds, as I said already, informal conversations with people who just want to have coffee. So lots and lots of ways that we are hearing from people. We also receive government information from the federal and provincial government and review that, UBCM and LMLGA, Lower Mainland Local Government Association, so that we're looking at data that we hear from them. We also get information from things like the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board, Mission Chamber of Commerce, and other local not-for-profit organizations that we can use to validate what we believe we're hearing. So people are telling us the biggest concerns that they have are growth, especially growth without matching the community amenities and services, the infrastructure. They have concerns about affordability, and people, I think, more and more across the board in all communities right now are concerned about ethics and affordability. So, and transparency, I should say. And so we are definitely hearing all of that. We acknowledge that it can be difficult to hear every voice, especially people who are marginalized, who don't have the ability to get up here on a bus, or who are not super comfortable with the technology. So we're always working on finding more low barrier ways for people to engage.
And just to kind of focus in on one part of this, do you feel that the engagement around the proposal for the City Hall was sufficient? And what will you do next time? You kind of talked about this already, but how would you summarize it?
I'd say we'll never really know whether the engagement was enough because we didn't get to start it. And so it's important for people to understand something. We work in British Columbia with a system that has the same number of votes for the mayor as council. This isn't like New York or Toronto, where a mayor can make an executive decision and then it just proceeds. And what that means is that council could not have gone out and begun a process of public engagement without first having those initial readings. Those are the way processes are kicked off. And I'm so sorry that people were led to believe that there was a final decision being made on July 5th. Not only was it not true, it would not even have been possible. But also would not have been possible for council to go out and tell the community about a proposal and get information from you and give information to you unless at least 4 members of council raised their hand to do that. In fact, that didn't happen, as we know. It was a 0-7 vote based on the information that was flooded to us in those first few days. But really, we did have a very robust plan. I can tell you, council didn't necessarily agree in all aspects about the proposal, but the one thing council did agree on is the importance of ensuring we had a really robust communication mechanism. To me, it should be evidence to people that something was not particularly strong or robust about the argument against this, that it relied on 2 things. If it needed to be leaked and it needed to be peppered with misinformation, that should make you wonder why the argument wouldn't just have stood out through the deliberative process. I think the people who were involved in the leaking of the information fully understood that there was no way for council to actually rush this through in 3 or 4 nights. There was just no way that that was possible. And if they didn't know that, they could have found out, and they should have found out before they spread that information. So it really is difficult to gauge just exactly how much that spreading of information affected the process, but I can tell you that my vote, and I think a lot of the votes that went against it, said this is going to be incredibly divisive in our community now that this information is out there, however inaccurate it is, because it had really lit people on fire. It really had made people get hot and angry, and it was already pitting neighbors against neighbors. And there was just no way that I think we could imagine having a deliberative dialogue. So I think I've spoken earlier about some of the things we could have done to set the table for people and understanding the challenges we were facing, the process that we were going through, the problems we were trying to address. Those are all things we could have done differently and better. But there's just no way we could actually go and spend resources and money on an engagement process unless council supported it. And that's what was missed the other day. We are going to have to deal with this problem, and there are things people need to understand. Some of the things that we considered, and you'll hear more about this in the next little while, we looked at leasing, and leasing wasn't cheaper. And in fact, not only was leasing more expensive in the long term, but leasing meant we were paying somebody else's mortgage instead of building equity that we could then use when we were ready to move into larger buildings or repurposed buildings, we would have them. It also means that some of the amenities that we wanted to address, such as getting more space for public arts or community events, those will be delayed and we'll have to go back. I've already talked about some of the challenges here. We'll have to continue to deal with those. And there are going to be operational expenses associated with keeping two buildings operating, especially two older buildings, as opposed to one that's newer and more efficient. So we'll look for ways. That's part of the reason that Taryn and I work so closely together, to have more creative ways to have input from the community and how we might solve those problems and answer your questions. I want the community to know I was always okay, and I think everybody on council was always okay with the idea that this proposal might not get community support and might not succeed. It would have been lovely to have a conversation on its merits. I had people reach out to me who genuinely believed that their taxes were going to double. And our director of finance informed people that the average household, a household with about $1 million value, would pay about $47 for that borrowing on a tax bill. Now, that's not a small amount of money. I don't want to minimize it. That might be enough to pay for baby food or diapers or groceries. And that's the conversation I wanted to have with people is this something that for you is worth it at that point, and given these pluses and minuses? That's the conversation that I thought we were going to have. And if we had not arrived at a yes vote on that, I think everybody would have been okay. But I think what was really concerning is that many people, I've had a lot of folks who said, and I think we even have a question that came in later today, is there going to be a way for the community to learn more? Is there a chance for us to address this process now still? And there really isn't. And so we've heard from some folks who said, hey, I didn't get a chance to weigh in. I didn't get a chance to say what I thought were some positives here. And so that's a problem. But I think we will have to really learn from this experience and move forward.
So our next area is a continuation, I would say, around engagement and transparency. How will the city work to rebuild public trust and reduce hostility online?
So a quick question for you, Taryn. Time-wise, where are we relative to where we thought we would be here?
We are at 6:45.
So are we ahead or behind where we thought we were?
We're pretty good so far.
Okay, I think I've covered a fair amount of this, so I'll try to be concise on this one. I think we need to always make sure that we are continuously sharing factual, timely information. We do that. We'll look for every way we can improve to do it digitally and in real time and in person. And we need to ask you guys to help us remind people to pause before they post alarming or false claims, and just help people to see whether or not the information that they're receiving passes what I call the sniff test. You know, if we had a council where there was some scandal in the past where a councillor had been found to inappropriately be benefiting from the public purse or had violated the rules, I might understand why people had more reason to be concerned here. Certainly there's evidence of that in the world right now, and I get it. So it's important we have to acknowledge that Mission's a tiny place in the context of all of this distrust that's going on there. I don't fail to see that. But it's important for us to say to people, hey, be better. I'm just going to read you a portion of an email that I received, and it's important to acknowledge that this email was received a week after Council had already voted unanimously not to proceed with the City Hall project. The email, I won't read the whole thing to you, and I won't read the last word because there may be people who would be offended, but it says, this is referring to council. I suggest you all get a CAT scan ASAP because your brain isn't firing correctly in all cylinders. Thank you, you corrupt, dumb Fs. And that type of message is just really not healthy for dialogue. I just wonder why people think that would actually work. If you went out and you communicated that way in a workplace with somebody else, Would they be more likely to respond or less? I think it's no different with community leaders and staff here. We're human beings first. And it was really alarming, some of the things that people did and said. I mean, I had somebody reach out to a person in my friend's social circle via social media and tell her that I was dead. I wasn't sure whether it was meant as that I had died or whether it was meant as a threat. But either way, what's the value in that? I had my sister call me and ask me, is it true that you're moving to Victoria? And I said, no, where'd you get that from? And it's just absolutely incredible, the stuff that's going on. We have a question about resigning that we'll talk about later on. No, I don't know where people are getting these things from. But we're trying to be real. That's just really all we can do. I've got a book from a guy named Jim Hogan on my bedside table I'm reading. It's called I'm Right and You're All Idiots. And it's a book really about how do we deal with the escalating tension in public discourse. And what it basically says is not only be a good listener, but show people you're listening. We had a lady come before us here about a month and a half ago when we were approving our OCP. And she had a long list of questions, and I just finally realized I needed to not just say to her the answers to her questions, that I needed to say to her, I think underlying your questions is a concern that the government is trying to intervene in your life or surveil you, and I can just let you know that that simply isn't true. I can simply let you know that the government doesn't have any interest in controlling your movements or understanding what's happening in your private life. I know that you're worried about that, but I had to get to a deeper level and just say, that's just not what government does. At least not as far as I know here in small town Mission. That's just not the way that we try to be here. We're just people who tried to kind of get involved in our community in a way, same as many others volunteer. This is how we jumped into the ring to try and help out. So myself and many others ran to push back against sort of the behind the scenes interference that we had seen historically here around land use. We wanted to have, I remember having a conversation with one member of previous council who said, are you going to come in and continue the trend of moving into a professionalization of land use so that it's rigorous and the community has input and it's not about friends of certain elected individuals getting preference? And I said, absolutely, it's one of the main reasons that I'm running. And that's something that our council has really been dedicated to. Council decisions have to follow the law, and that's something people need to really be assured of, with support from staff and council, and it's not driven by individuals. So even if I was a bad guy, I wouldn't get very far here. And so it's really important for everybody here to help share those messages.
Why was the public told not to applaud in the meeting on July 7th?
Thank you. This is the question where the person said that they felt like they had been scolded for that. Is that right? So apologies to people who thought that was some sort of scolding. It isn't at all. And there's another question, if not this one, from this person that gave me a really good idea. And I think it's in another question here about how we can help people to know more about what our rules are before they ever show up here or as they come in. But those rules are simply there to make sure that everybody feels comfortable in our chambers. And I'll point out at the beginning of the meeting, if you watch the video, there was a lady who stood at the very back in the lobby. And when I started to read the same land acknowledgement that I began with this evening, she began booing. And I spoke up at that time. And I said to everybody, that's not acceptable. We need to show respect here for people. And I know that the author of this question is really, I've been at meetings where the author of this question has seen that type of behavior and it's not been fair to them. And that's the exact same mindset I have when it comes to all of our conduct. So why not applause? Well, I had some people who were in chambers that evening. At least 3 people I know came here because they were actually supportive of the plan, and 2 others told me they were here to just learn more. But when clapping happens, whenever somebody gets up or whenever a member of council makes a point, those people often say, I don't feel comfortable expressing a different opinion. It's very much like a courtroom where you wouldn't see applause, or chambers, a parliament legislature where, again, clapping is not considered appropriate. Why? It's meant to be a place for deliberative dialogue. And so it's really important for people to to have a feeling that they are going to be heard, even if they're not in the majority in a particular crowd. So that's why there's no clapping, no booing, no cheering within council chambers. That's why we don't allow signs and banners. And so we have lots of other ways that we want people to have input. And I think when, for example, people are protesting on the front lawn and making their message be heard that way, that's fine. That's a good place for it. There's lots of other places, and I'll talk more about that. But it's important for people to understand that once we get in here, it's a place for sober thinking, and that's the point. This author said something about, and I may not have it exactly right, and I apologize if I don't, that they were being scolded for knowing information that had been leaked by others. It was sort of not their fault, if I understood the question, that it had been leaked. And the person used this metaphor. It's like finding out that my ex cheated on me, but I'm the one who's wrong for knowing it. And I would argue that that's not the right metaphor. And the reason is that your ex, in this case, nobody had cheated on you. Nobody had done anything wrong. And so everything that we had done was both legal and ethical, and we had, as I said already, just begun a process that was going to involve community input. Unfortunately, that was misrepresented or lost in the online dialogue, but it wasn't, nobody was upset that the community members had heard this. If I heard this information, I might start to be really alarmed myself. A lot of the folks who reached out to me are not people who are really commonly in City Hall or familiar with it, so I understand why they might have been alarmed. But the people who are putting out that information don't have some special insight into City Hall, and if they did have information that was leaked, you have to ask yourself, A, how do they have that? B, why is it important to share that information ahead of time if it's going to be released publicly? And C, why not share the information accurately? So all of that stuff is, I think, is part of what was going on. But no, people responding to what they heard, that's just natural and normal, and we understand that.
How can the city better model transparency?
Well, we really strive to be transparent. I think it's becoming more important than ever, but it is incredibly difficult to compete with viral information. The truth is that it is so easy for information to be shared, especially if a person sharing it has no filter. They're quite willing to say just about anything. And that's clearly what's going on here. I mean, the rumors are I don't even know where some of them are coming, for example, about me personally. So some people really will always believe rumors, especially because I think in some cases people have had negative experiences with city officials or with other government officials or with authorities such as the police or courts, and I get all that. But again, I entered public life because I wanted to make sure that we were addressing public challenges and staying accountable. You know, I was looking through some old articles, and I went to an article that involved an interview with Mayor Hawes in October of 2018. He was interviewed by the Mission Record the evening of the election, and he was speaking about public discourse on social media during the campaign. And he said, I had no idea that it was that nasty, that there was so many nasty people, and that's disheartening. I find that pretty offensive. And what's much worse is your family is bothered by it. And I would say I completely agree with him on that. And I would say that it has worsened in the 7 years since that. I think that the pandemic has worsened it. I think that sometimes people don't stop and think about the impact they're having, as he mentioned, on families. I have all kinds of people who are calling me and saying, I don't want to have my name mentioned in this because it could ruin my business, or it could be, it could affect my child at their school. And so I would just remind people of all that. So we're really, as a council, interested in stoking and fostering environment, a partnering environment and a collaborative environment, and one where neighbors actually work through their challenges. Together, we get a lot done. That's kind of been the spirit of our community. But I think some people just sort of take pleasure in creating angst. And it's not the way I'm built. I don't have an explanation for you. I don't know why that is.
Next question is about the work that the city might be doing to decolonize public engagement. Do you have an update with this?
I actually would first say to the author of this question, I would really appreciate if you would send me an email so that we can have a conversation. I'll take you for a coffee or we can talk on the phone. I'd really like to get into more detail about what exactly some suggestions might be from you. And I know the person who wrote, and I know they have some experience in this area, so I'd really love to hear their ideas, because I think we should try to make those improvements wherever we can. So let me make that commitment. Let me also say that Mission understands our history. The word mission literally comes from the fact that we were originally a mission that was entirely devoted to converting people of First Nations ancestry to a lifestyle of a Western lifestyle, a Catholic lifestyle, an agricultural lifestyle, as opposed to the itinerant and in tune with nature style that Indigenous people had here, and that gave birth to the larger principles of that culture. And so we really want to be a different mission. Our mission now is to be leaders in reconciliation, and we have a dedicated person in our organization whose job is to help us to constantly improve in this. We were one of the first municipalities to adopt principles of reconciliation. That happened just before I was elected by the council of the day in April 2021. And we really have as part of our principles to try and be more than symbolic in the way we connect with local First Nations. We're trying to look for ways to win-win, to create more jobs, more opportunities for education, more housing, for example. And so some of the things that we've done, we worked with Lacamo First Nation and Kwantlen First Nation to create the Forest Guardian program, which gave a lot of young people an opportunity to work in forest-related jobs, and it benefited us. A lot of the people you'll see, for example, up on the weekends in the Stave West Forest are people from that program. First Nations were given a really robust role and helped so much in our waterfront revitalization strategy, helping us to see how we could build in things like living shores and honoring culture and keeping the place having sort of a magnetism that comes out of the original cultural meaning of that place. Many of you are already aware that we signed a historic agreement, a land back agreement with Matsqui, Samath, and Lacamo First Nations. But what you might not realize is we just celebrated the completion of that deal a few days ago, and that this will lead to the development of 2 mixed-use developments and fee simple in our community. They will add housing, they will add employment places, and so there'll be jobs for people of Indigenous backgrounds, as well as opportunities for people in the larger community, as well as revenue to the community out of that. We're working with Lacamo First Nation as well as other local communities around the stewardship of the Hatzic watershed so that we can address the perennial issues of flooding and user conflict over water in that area. And we're not just focused on how do we respond to that, but how do we actually prevent it? And that's largely because of the input from Lacamo First Nation. The work you see around Canada Day, the work that you see around the land surveying and understanding what lays beneath Fraser River Heritage Park is being done in collaboration with First Nations. We are really working deliberatively with them before we run a Canada Day or before we do anything in that park right now, because we respect its origins there. So we're committed to deepening those efforts and hearing new ideas, and I'm eager to hear from anybody who has ways that we can improve them.
Is there a posted code of conduct for the public if they are visiting chambers? And what does the city do to help ensure that first-time guests understand what is allowed in chambers? Mm-hmm. And how does the city work to make people feel more comfortable?
Again, this is just such a great example of not just a question, but a question that will lead to a really good suggestion. So I will be bringing this idea to council. We do have signs in our building that are focused on respectful workplace conduct, but there's nothing in, and the writer is absolutely right that we should be doing this on our door and on the door of City Hall and on the door of chambers and maybe even on the wall here that tells people the rules as well as the why behind those rules. And so I will be asking for that to happen. When there are large meetings, such as the one we had the other night, I read out, usually for people in advance, what those expectations are. That's exactly what I did the other night, early in the meeting. and I will continue to use that practice. Our staff will try to greet people at the door and let them know things like where they can sit and where they can store signs and so forth, and we can lean into that more. And we provide many other ways for people to have input, whether it's a public session like this one, or they can email us, as I said earlier. One of the things that I think would really be useful, oh, by the way, there are lots of ways people can come before council, whether they're delegations. You can write us a letter and have it included under correspondence. Obviously, public hearings and public information meetings and town halls and sessions. For example, we do our rural strategy coming up. There'll be lots of opportunities on that. I welcome protests here on our grounds. I think that's fine. A peaceful protest is fine. And I think actually council should consider whether or not we're creating a dedicated space for something like a speaker's corner, whether it's here or whether it's at another park or another public gathering place where people can genuinely participate in that activity. And so, yeah, I think we really want to make sure those rules are fresh in the minds of everybody and understood by everybody. So I appreciate the suggestion.
We are about at 7:05, so we have 25 minutes. And the next area is some clarity on the new public safety building.
Okay, so what happens next? Okay, well, this one's going to take a little bit longer, so let me try to get through it quickly. So on the public safety building, if you weren't here, if you haven't seen the mission record, council voted against the Civic Center, the City Hall building. Nothing will happen with that one until we come up with some other options, which we'll present to the community. On this one, council moved to proceed with the first three readings, and they added two other ingredients. They added that there would be a locally developed approach that's similar to what's called the AAP, the Alternative Approval Process. Now that's something, we're not calling it the AAP because we can't, because an AAP is used in a public process where the government mandates it. Here, we're well below that line. But we're still going to use one. We call it a threshold of opposition approach. And so we'll be communicating with the public on how that process will look in the next little while. Our staff have to develop something, but we'll be going through that whole process publicly. There'll be at least 2 advertisements and a period of time for people to express their thoughts as well. There will be public information sessions all the way through this, and ways for people to learn more about the project, both online as well as in other in-person ways. And we're going to make sure that that process gives time for people to be back from holidays. We know that a lot of people are away right now. At the same time, the city has to submit that borrowing bylaw to the province, and the province's job is to make sure that we've done all the things correctly, so that we've accurately stated and demonstrated a need for this at our community's level, that our calculations are accurate, and that we're following all of the legislation set up by the province. We also would then need to send it to an organization called the Municipal Finance Authority. This is the body that lends money to municipalities. They do it at a rate. Basically, municipalities borrow from other municipalities, and so they beat the average lending rate that you could get in a bank, and they will do that as well. So you'll see advertisements in newspapers and online and social media, and have opportunity to hear about that process as we go through it. Let's see if there's anything I've forgotten. So what happens if council sees throughout that process, we said it was going to be a binding process. It said there were 2 things we added. That's the second one. It's going to be a binding process. So if the threshold of opposition exceeds the number, then council will simply not proceed. If there is demonstrated community support, council can still vote any way it wants, but at this point, I would anticipate it's likely that it would proceed. And then at that point, the city would borrow the funds that they needed. So what happens next is we get a more detailed design and we borrow the money that we need. So right now, the projected borrow is up to $36 million, but that doesn't mean we'd actually borrow all of that. That's the amount that the highest we could imagine having to borrow with what we call a Class D estimate. I'll talk about that more later on. And then we would begin with the process of building and equipping the fire hall, which would then be completed, we hope, in 2027. This process will take a little bit longer, but that's still what I would anticipate. And that's what our our fire master plan calls for. At the same time, we have staffing and equipping of the facility to go along with that, and all of that will be a part of the fire master plan. So you'll see visuals of the current and proposed facilities. You'll have opportunities for questions and to be informed and to give your input along the way. And if you have any ideas for how we can improve the process, reach out to me or any other member of council, and we'll definitely listen.
Okay, how does the city end up with the costing for major capital projects like the fire hall and proposed to City Hall?
Excellent. So we start out with what we call a Class D estimate, which is sort of the biggest, more broad estimate you can do. Why don't we dive right into something that's more detailed? Well, because it's incredibly costly to do that. And again, until council has a resolution and has clarity that the community wants something, we don't invest the much higher cost to get into that higher estimate or that more precise estimate. So what we do with a Class D estimate is basically we agree on what we call the upset amount. What's the most we can anticipate paying, including the contingency. The contingency is the money that you have set aside for overages, for unexpected things, or for things like, for example, current market conditions. And so that's how we arrived at that $36 million. But if the process moves us on, the next thing would be that we would go with a much more precise estimate and then actually borrow the amount of money that we needed, and we only actually borrow it when we need it. So we don't borrow it the very first day that it's allowed. We borrow it when we actually need it to pay for expenses, and that allows us to not necessarily put it all onto a tax bill at one time. We're also going to continue to look at grants and other opportunities that may be out there to reduce the local cost. And because we didn't have the Civic complex approved, I'll be asking our Director of Finance whether any of the reserves that we had talked about using for that might be available to help reduce the borrowing burden. I'm not sure if they will be. I don't want to make a promise that there will be, but that's a question that we need to ask. The question also included in my version here, why don't we fully fund from savings? And the answer is that we have added to our savings since I've been on this council and tried to catch up, and we've got quite healthy reserves. But the reason our staff asked to do this is because our council previously had underfunded our reserves. And so we do not have nearly as much saved in our bank account for something like this project as we should. And we're catching up on things like our reclamation after our dump closes and so forth. If we increase the amount of savings dramatically so that we don't have to borrow, there are a couple of issues. First, there's a really big burden on the tax bill of people in a short time. Instead of borrowing, and we recognize that borrowing is something we're all averse to, we are as well. And remember, we're taxpayers too. But the advantage of borrowing is that you spread out that costing over 30 years at the most. And what council does here is we do debt sinking. So we typically pay down debt much more quickly, which is why we only have 1.38% of our total debt threshold is used. So we are literally at just above 1% of what we could borrow in this community, and much of that will be paid off in 26 and 27. So this allows us to borrow and use the amenity we need right now to address our issues, and it spreads that payment over users that come into the community later on. If everybody who's paying taxes now is saving for it, they're paying for future users, even people who have yet to move to our community. So that's why we don't immediately build a building that has a 30-year lifespan or can have all that space. Everybody today would be paying the cost for folks down the line, and that's not representative, and it's not financially tenable. We also seek in-kind contributions from developers wherever we can. So for example, the land that the fire safety building is on is very valuable land, but because it was acquired through a development process when the Cedar Valley or the Cade Bar Industrial Park was approved, we got it for $10. So we got 2 acres of prime land, and all the land that we had set aside for building City Hall or building the fire hall turned out not to be okay. It was too wet, it had too much natural environment that needed to be protected. So that's the sort of thing we do. Another example is that in the original proposal around the community space at the at the City Hall, which again has not been approved, we didn't move on. by having that city hall be more than just the chambers be more than just a chambers, but also be a space for the arts and for community meetings and events, we were able to take about $1 million of developer contributions called ACCs, amenity cost charges, to help pay for that, and that reduced the burden because development was then paying for that. And then with the safety building, $3 million of that will be funded through the Forestry Legacy Reserve. So this is money that's been saved over the years as we have made money in our forestry operations, and we set it aside for projects just like this. That same reserve was what we used for our CAT scanner here in Mission as well. And we'll look at other reserves whenever we're doing capital projects. All right, what's next?
Okay, and what's on the go? What else is going on in the city?
Oh my gosh, this is a long one, so let me kind of zip through this. I'm glad we're getting to some other stuff. So we are moving into a Parks, Recreation, and Culture Master Plan update. You'll see this on 21st of July. This has been informed by input from culture groups, arts groups, and sporting organizations. This is an update, but it will really give the community a clear idea of what our intentions are with our parks and trails, cultural amenities across the city, not just in the short term, but over like a 10-year window. But specifically, as you know, the Centennial Park area is being revitalized with funds that the city has set aside, including covering the lacrosse box, which we expect to have completed by the time tryouts start next year, and a spray park and basketball courts in Emery Park, as that area is developing really rapidly. So that park is going to be built to be ready for that development. You'll see on the 21st that we're beginning our process of reviewing our bylaws and our bylaw enforcement. So we anticipate that we'll be looking at a process that will focus more on enforceability, offer the community an opportunity to have input, focus on issues that we are hearing from the community are higher priorities, such as disruptive social behavior in our commercial centers, encampments, parking, and issues really related to life safety. And less on issues that are much more difficult to enforce and where there's sort of neighbor-to-neighbor stuff going on. I also want to make it clear to people how they maybe have to be involved if they're going to help us collect information and what the limits of bylaw enforcement are. And we know we're going to have to add bylaw officers, and more importantly, add bylaw officers who serve in times of the day and week when most people are home. Right now, our services are largely during business hours, and that doesn't serve people who are, sitting at home in the evening on a Friday night and they can't get in their driveway because somebody's parked in front of them. And of course, our police and fire departments are in need of consistently being expanded as per the master plans and strategic plans for both of those. And so we'll need to be doing that as we get to budget season. We're still eager to try and expand transit. We received some bad news this year that unfortunately the provincial government did not provide us with matching funds for the planned transit enhancements. So those have been deferred another year, but we are continuing with our efforts to try and enhance handy-dart service, more frequency into bi-directional service. Another thing we're working on is enhancing what happens with the 701 service. This is a service that connects Mission City Station with Haney Place and then leads into the Translink system for people who want to get in on SkyTrain, for example. Currently, that does not operate in a way that is fully functional for us. We don't have as many runs per day as we'd like, and the bus is an express bus until it reaches Maple Ridge, and we want it to be able to stop in a couple of places, such as Silverdale or at the intersection of Nelson where there's the industrial park. So we're working on that right now as well. We just ratified the official community plan, but there are some upcoming things that are a part of that. The rural strategy is coming, and it's expected to be completed in the next 6 months. There'll be lots of opportunity for input from the entire community. So we want to hear from people who own land in that area, whether they're residents or whether they own land for industrial or commercial purposes or recreational purposes. We also want to hear from the entire community because we all use this area partly for recreation or for things like the garbage dump. And we will make sure that we have lots of input over the next 6 months on that. We're doing neighborhood planning along the Lougheed corridor and the health and wellness hub all near the hospital. And that process will take about a year, and again, lots of opportunity for people to get into the micro details there. And going back up a tiny bit, our affordable housing policies are something council is eager to see soon, and we've asked that that be accelerated so that we can bring those in and they fit well with our OCP. I mentioned earlier, we're working with electoral areas F and G, the Fraser Valley Regional District and Lacamo First Nation, on what's called the Hatzic Watershed Stewardship Table. And that process is reaching a milestone where we'll have a chance for the community to have input and to see how we might create a table that addresses some historic 1894 historic issues with chronic flooding, chronic user conflict between recreational users, fisheries, environmental protection efforts, First Nations, and farmers out there. And so we really have had a lot of disconnection around the table. I should mention that the Dewdney Area Improvement District is also a part of those conversations. And it's been a really exciting process, but we need to put in place a mechanism that will address these issues in the future expeditiously and collaboratively so that we're not constantly living in flood response mode. We'll be moving to automated curbside collection, full implementation in 2027. We have already got our new, Mterra is the provider, and they're currently doing manual waste collection. Unfortunately, manual waste collection is a very expensive thing. The cost of moving to a new full-time system of that would have been extraordinarily expensive. The cost of moving to automated is more expensive than our current system as well, but believe it or not, it's actually cheaper than the system of manual and will be more reliable. So we're looking forward to that. We're working, myself, Councillor Gill and Councillor Davies have all been advocates around the Fraser Valley Regional District table to reassess the way that our animal control cost sharing is done, and we're making some real progress there. I'm optimistic that we'll have something for the community shortly on this. I estimate it will save us about $100,000 a year in mission in funding that we're paying right now based on an old model. Our joint shared services team with Abbotsford is continuing to work on the water source. We know we'll need to expand one on the south shore of the Fraser River, and we're currently doing more research into the design of the wells there. We will have to go back and attack the issue of City Hall crowding. I've spoken about that plenty tonight. One of the biggest ones for me, and I think that has sort of been a blind spot, is that we have not seen the 2008 Heritage Protection Strategy that was created by Sharon Surrett ever really get put in place. And in fact, that document now is well past its prime, and it needs to be updated. And I think we need to really examine the way that we fund and support the Historical Society that does a lot of work for us around identifying what properties have heritage value, mechanisms for protecting that heritage value, even if a building is being redeveloped, identification of heritage places for people who want to see them or tour and learn more about them, the museum and archives itself. I remarked to somebody the other day that the hours of opening at the Mission Museum are the same today as they were in 2003. And so I will be pushing hard for council to support heritage protection and really make sure we have robust heritage protection in the coming years and gradually increase that. I'll tell you bluntly, we've been incredibly well served by one of our Freedom of the City recipients, our archivist, Val Bilsberger, and by her board. And I have to tell you that she has done the work of 3 people. And so for a long time, we've sort of gotten used to getting a lot done for a smaller investment than was fair. And I think we'll need to look at something that considers what happens when Val's no longer there, because that's just not fair and it's not a sustainable approach. And if we don't do something with heritage protection, and I hear this from people all the time, we'll lose it. We're looking for even more opportunities for affordable and accessible events. Mark Haney, our manager of culture, identified a number of new events that will be coming of all shapes and sizes in the coming year using the newly revitalized and continuously being revitalized Clark Theatre. You saw some new things at Canada Day. Our Christmas plaza is getting increased this year, the lighting and the events, and more of that's coming because we know that people need to get out and spend time with each other. Going back to some of what's happening online, I think people need to get to know their neighbors a bit and come to understand that their neighbor is not a bad guy, and just go out and rub some shoulders with people. That's everything that I think I had on this one. So whatever you're
Okay,
ready.
and then we have one more question, and then there were a couple questions that came in
Okay.
through the forum, so that's great. But we did have a question of how are you and council holding up during this time?
I have to tell you, I'm really was grateful that this wasn't a question I received from one person. It was a question I received from dozens of people. And the second question that they asked there, and I'll answer at the same time, is it true that myself or members of council are resigning? I will be completely honest and say this has been one of the more stressful experiences I've ever had in elected life. I'm in my 11th year of serving this community in some elected capacity, and many other years of doing things sort of behind the scenes as a volunteer. And I'm not unique in that. Councillor Plecas and Councillor Hamilton have served for a long time in this community. Others have done so too, even though Councillor Elias, who's new on our council, she's worked in service to our community for many years. Everybody has. I could list everybody. They all have, and even in their work practices. I mean, you know, for example, that Councillor Gill is constantly through his business supporting local things. And so it's been difficult for people to hear that our community so quickly has assumed that it's true that we're not trustworthy. I don't understand it. I think sometimes our council doesn't understand it. These are people that I just run into every day. It's one of the best things about the community that we just run into people. But boy, oh boy, it's hard. You don't want to go to your local park or your local grocery store because people are actually confronting you. And so, yeah, it's been really stressful. But all of the messages that people have taken the time to call and reach out with, and I have to tell you a little story. A gentleman came yesterday here. He's somebody I've met once before, but he literally made a point of coming here yesterday because he didn't think it was enough to call or send an email just to say thank you and to say how much he appreciates the service of myself and my council. And those messages have made it a lot easier to get through this time. So thank you for those who are doing that, especially because I know people are sometimes concerned about what might happen if they speak up. And I hope people will spread the message in a quieter way with their neighbors, that they can approach us. I had somebody say, you know, you can disagree with Paul. I've known him for years. This person told me that they'd said this to somebody, but you will never find somebody who's more committed to your community, and you can call them anytime. And that's true. People get emails from me at 1:30 in the morning because I literally lay awake at night thinking about this community. Are we resigning? Heck no. I have to tell you, I sat there the other day. I was on my holiday. Again, I told you I think about this all the time, and I sat there and I listed all the things that our council has achieved through advocacy and planning and deliberative processes here. And I am impressed by it. I have to tell you, I'm so proud of the work we have done and the work we have before us in the last 15 months of this term. So we're not going anywhere, and we don't plan to slow down. And I'm sorry if people feel that they need to sort of spread the idea that maybe there is no way for us to work together. That's just not what my experience is. We'll work together, and we'll get stuff done together. You had some sort of some real-time questions that you were going to ask me here, and I'll be brief on these ones.
Okay, we're at 7:26, so we might want to just go for a couple minutes longer.
Okay.
But one of the questions that came in earlier today was resident read in the paper that there was some job loss in Mission Abbotsford, and she's wondering what the city is doing to help unemployed residents in Mission.
The story was about the period of time quite soon after the election of the American president and his comments about tariffs, and at that time there was tremendous anxiety. There still is, as we know, about tariffs. And so we know all along the Canadian border, communities that were located there saw particularly big impacts in employment. The evidence that we have been given is largely that those were in the Abbotsford area, in businesses that are export heavy. Have we specifically targeted those? We have done that more through our advocacy to the province, to the federal government, through UBCM. But for us, what we've really done is tried to focus on creating workplaces for people here with living wage jobs, like the Cade Bar Industrial Park, or you'll see a new building that is down on Nelson Street. We have a major employer that's moving here, a well-known baker, and I'm looking forward to when we can publicly announce their full move-in, but they're functioning here already. And the other thing that we're working on, and Councillor Gill has been a really good partner on this, is our Economic Development Committee is changing a bit to an Economic Development Advisory Committee with one particular focus, and that is creating an economic development strategy. And we've had an economic lands strategy, employment land strategy before, which sort of said, if you build workplaces, they will come. And there's been some truth to that. But we have never really thought about how do we market our community? What do we do to help ensure that the labor force is here? How do things like housing and amenities lead to the attraction of people in economic driving industries? How can we work more with universities and with research entities or think tanking, that sort of thing? I know one of our community leaders, Mr. Salvaraja, speaks with me about this all the time. And so that's what our economic development strategy will look at, is all of that comprehensively. And so we are not at the same level of responsiveness when it comes to larger employment trends that the federal or provincial government are, but be assured it still remains one of the number one things I care about, and I think our council cares about, is improving economic opportunity and local jobs.
And you alluded to this question before, but we did have a question wondering if council would be willing to recall the proposal for a new city hall and reconsider their decision.
I don't think so. I think we, I've, for lack of a better word, bemoaned some of the challenges that came out of the misinformation. But I really want to show respect to people who took the time. The vast majority of the comments I received from people were very respectful. And I thought we needed to step out of that process and go back about it a different way. And we'll do that. But technically speaking, we've already taken action on this, and so our reconsideration bylaw wouldn't fit. But no, I typically use reconsiderations when one of two things is true. Either something inaccurate was a part of the decision. We've had a couple of moments where there was some confusing information, and we've had to do reconsideration, or there's been a matter where a council member has been absent and it failed on a tie. But when a vote is 0-7, I typically don't bring it back for reconsideration. I hear this. You're not the only person. The person who sent this question today is not the only person who's asked this. But I've already spent time on what I had hoped we would have done and more on what I think we can do next, and that's where we are.
Why hasn't there been lights installed into the Mission skate park? Have you heard anything about that happening?
I will see whether or not that's in the parks master plan, but I don't anticipate that it is. This is something we did have a proposal or a community member come. This gentleman's job was sort of to come and present on the covering of it. And I know there's been a message about this from youth. In fact, my son's friends have told him to ask me about this repeatedly. I don't anticipate that that's our next priority. It might be something in the Parks Master Plan, but I think first, right now, we're looking at what we don't have. And I've been asked about this. When are we getting a turf field, another turf field? Well, I think first we're going to look at solving problems that we haven't solved, such as we haven't got a performance space for small theater. We don't have a cover on a lacrosse box, that sort of thing. Is it something that's down the line in the line of possibilities? I would say yes, it is. I think the other thing we'll have to think about is how do parents feel about this? How does it affect our ability to supervise people? Because there have been some issues down there, and they've involved, and this is part of the reason why we have a gangs and federal funding that was sent to us by the federal government, because there were some issues around and concerns around that in some centers, and that was one of them. I think people also will be concerned about noise and light if we are doing it too late. So it's a bigger question for us than just perhaps lighting. I think it's a question as well about sort of weatherproofing that down the line so that you're lighting it during the parts of the year where it's coldest, darkest, and wettest. But I don't think that's in our immediate plans.
Okay. And what is your understanding of 15-minute cities, and how can you assure us that Mission is not slated as becoming one?
This is the same one I actually was talking about earlier when I said we received a number of questions from people during the OCP, where people were concerned that we were moving into something called a 15-minute city. And I just don't have any other way to put it to people, which is that nobody in City Hall has ever even talked to me about doing this. It's not in our OCP. Our OCP is a public and completely transparent document. And so I get this question all the time, and it arises when I dig into it with people, with folks thinking that the city wants to limit their movement or surveil them or both. And the flat out answer to that is nobody wants to do that. That simply is the opposite. We work hard on trying to make sure that people have options for mobility across our community to improve roads and transit. We do try to make sure that every neighborhood has in it a park that's no more than 600 meters away. I think it might be 400, trying to make sure that people can do more of their shopping without having to jump in their car if that's an issue. But there is absolutely nothing in any of our planning that's meant to constrict people's ability to live freely.
This next question is about accessibility. Is there any update or opportunity for Mission Self-Advocacy Group to work on a project that the community could use, and to get people with disabilities out into the community?
Yes, I think there is. And I would say, first of all, our accessibility, our AID committee, Accessibility, Inclusion, Diversity Committee, did a great job of getting us an accessibility plan in timely fashion, and that will lead to improvements on an incremental basis across our community. That will now give us what I hope is the opportunity to look at the other two letters in that, really accelerating the efforts in our community actively for inclusive places, inclusive activities, a welcoming community, and for diversity. That's something I hear all the time from people. People are really concerned about escalating racism, escalating violence against people who are in the LGBTQ plus SIA community, people who have any kind of visible disability, people who are having issues with accessing resources because they're newly settled here. So I hope that that's something that self-advocates will work with our AID committee, because I know there's an overlap there to do. The other thing that I've been hearing a lot, I know that Rotary is interested in this, I know that the city is interested in this, and I know that the Board of Education is interested in this, is building some truly accessible playgrounds. And it's not just, are they accessible for people in wheelchairs? So for example, neurodivergent people often have sensory differences, or people who are blind or deaf may have difficulty being able to actually access some of these things. So I would say to the authors of this question, and by the way, I haven't been to one of your committee meetings in a while, so please invite me, you turkeys. But I'd love to go and actually talk with you about this and see if we can find a way to connect you with those groups around this.
Okay, and so our final comment is more of a comment than a question, but I think it leads into the content on this slide. It says, Mayor Horn, I appreciate your address to the community and found your deliverance acceptable. Thank you for addressing the questions put forth by the residents of Mission. I will continue to follow and engage in public affairs as a taxpayer and a homeowner in this beautiful city of Mission. I look forward to hearing about your next endeavor our city is planning to express.
Thank you so much. And that, you're right, does lead us entirely into the closing. Are there any other questions before we go? Did we not have a question from somebody who was asking about, what was it? There was one about immigration, and there was one that was related. Oh, there was one about whether the city was going to participate in housing for refugees, putting in a grant for refugees. Am I correct in that?
Yes, there were some questions in addition to the job loss.
Okay, so I'll quickly address that one. We did have a proposal from a member of the community who thought that we should do that. We chose not to do that based on the input of our community Mission Healthy Community Council. And they are confident that all of the research that went into our community wellness strategy is solid, and it identified finding housing for other populations as a bigger priority. So that's what we're doing. The question also asked, do we have any indication of issues related to immigration in our community or illegal immigration in our community? And the answer simply is no. Never had any issue that's been raised with me about that. That was something that if it did happen, we would hear it largely from probably the federal MP, and we have not heard that here. Okay, so I think that answers everything I can recall seeing. So let's talk a little bit about how we can stay connected. Why don't I pause for a moment and just let you go through this slide, and then I'll say a thank you at the end. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great. So a few ways that you can stay connected with the city is follow us on social media. Our main channels are Facebook and Instagram. If you are on those channels, you might have noticed that we've been sharing stories from this presentation tonight. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to our newsletters. We send out various newsletters multiple times a month, and you can find those at mission.ca/subscribe. You can take a look at our website. We redid it last year, and it's a lot easier to navigate. And we also have engaged.mission.ca. You can tune into council meetings, and you can also email the mayor at phorn@mission.ca.
Add two things. The first is that if a person goes to engage.mission.ca, there's a way to sign up, and it might be the newsletter that tells people whenever there's a new engagement. It could be about a park, could be about our public works department. So you'll get emailed and said, there's a time for you to, there's a chance to put input in on something.
Exactly. And we even have a newsletter. You can, if that's the City Updates newsletter, we even have a news release newsletter. So you'll get all our news releases too.
People choose if they don't want to receive one of those things, but they can do the other. They can have subscription options.
Yes, they can.
Perfect. So you can avoid being inundated if you want to. The other thing I'll point out is that council is out at events with council cafes, and those are also published out there. And when's the next one? Do we have one? When's the next
one is slated to be for Mission Fest.
Sorry?
On August 16th at Mission Fest.
At Mission Fest. Okay, so I won't be at that one, I don't believe.
Note, we have Councillor Gill, Elias, and Davies.
So when you go to those, that's a chance to sit person to person with a councillor and have literally a coffee, or at Canada Day, we were giving out pop and chips to kids and anybody who wanted it. You can have the most simple interaction, or you can sit with a councillor and have 15 minutes of discussion on whatever's going on. We hear from people who are just concerned about the garbage collection in their neighborhood, all the way up to larger issues. It's all good at those meetings. You can find emails for the other members of council as well online at mission.ca, and welcome to do that anytime. So yeah, if you haven't checked out our website, please do. There's a lot of information there. And is there another slide, or shall I just go? Here we go. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who took the time to send us questions and is tuned in, whether you're tuning in live or watching this later on. We really, really, more than ever, appreciate people taking the time to get informed. And we've found that our community moves better together when we all do have the information, and we'll continue to be committed to making sure you have full and complete information. We talked about how to stay in line, and we really look forward to hearing from you more in the future. Thank you again, and have a wonderful evening.